Howdy, underlings. This is a repost from my main channel. I got sick after going to the state fair, so I'm not able to do much right now, but I think most of you probably haven't seen this video, and if you like it, there are two more moving over too. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to tip your dying rat. I accept likes, and
Hello everybody! I transformed myself into a bat just for this special occasion. With the new year coming, I wanted to have a series to work on throughout the year, because I haven't really done that so far. I think there's no better series for me to yap about though than Castlevania. This game has been a long-time special interest of mine, and I recently got my wife into the series on our live streams here on YouTube. But I didn't really start my gaming journey with Castlevania and games in general until I got a GBA, so most of my experiences with Castlevania comes from the RPG entries, which only makes up about half of the chronology, so I thought this would also be a great opportunity for me to check out the ones that I missed. Now, Castlevania as a series is about the eternal and never-ending struggle of the fight against evil and mankind's constant fighting on the ropes versus forces that would seek to wipe out or enslave them. The series follows a variety of human and vampire lead characters, and it's usually a series about stopping whatever current apocalypse is happening or about to happen, usually about stopping Dracula or stopping his resurrection. I personally love the series because of the classical storytelling of man forced to fight for freedom of man against horrors and forces far beyond his control, and how just one person who is willing to stand against the tide can make fate change its course forever. Be it just the human engineering of making a dam, or taking out an evil individual that would enslave or destroy us. Have you figured out that I'm talking about capitalism yet? Anyway, this is the first entry in the series, and being that it was an NES game, there isn't much to talk about here that wasn't said before, or hasn't been said before. NES games are very much overexplored and beaten to death by YouTubers like Angry Video Game Nerd and his clones, so I won't be playing the NES version. I'll be playing the GBA re-release of the NES version. The first entry is about Simon Belmont, who is the current, most recent descendant of the vampire hunting bloodline, the Belmonts. Simon is here to stop and kill Dracula once again, like his great-great-grandfather before him 100 years ago. This game, being from the NES, comes from the era where games were being moved from the arcade to home consoles, and they haven't quite figured out how to bridge the gap between those two things in terms of difficulty. This era of games is often called Nintendo Hard or Classic Hard. Personally, Castlevania gets me classic hard. I mean, have you seen the characters in this series? Why are they all so hot? Before we get too into difficulty, let's talk about Simon's moveset and how the game plays, because while many people consider this game to be hard, I think you'll find that compared to its peers, it's much more forgiving. If you didn't grow up with NES games, you might be asking why the hell my gameplay looks like this. Well, I'm using a CRT shader for my gameplay because that's how these games were intended to be played back in the day. When making the sprites for these games, the devs made them with the intent to look good on a CRT. They never thought people would one day be raw dogging these pixels on their computers, and as such, many games from that time can look a bit ugly when not being shown with a CRT. But this is also just my personal preference. I prefer to play retro consoles like this. When I play handhelds, I use the LCD shaders. And then for this one, because this one was intended to be played on a TV. Anyway, Simon's moveset is pretty basic and isn't much more complex than any other two-button game at the time. Simon wields the famed vampire-slaying whip called the Vampire Killer. Why is a whip so effective? Well, Dracula's into BDSM, and he loves being whipped. Drac also likes leather, but it's hard to depict that with an 8-bit color palette. The whip in this game is something very unique. In many games, your attack goes off and deals damage as soon as you press the button. But Vampire Killer has a short moment of animation leading up to the attack animation, so there's this delay. This was unique at the time because it adds a serious weight to his attacks, making them feel like they have a real punch to them. It's also super annoying because you can still be hit during this delay, so it encourages you to keep your distance. Since Simon also has a health bar instead of one-hit death, this makes for a great action game that makes you feel powerful without making you feel too powerful. You also have some iframes after getting hit to prevent you from being spammed to death, which is helpful since there is collision damage. You also have limited lives, and when you die, you're put back a room just before the boss. So it's pretty generous in an era of ballbusters. There are some other games like this from the time, like Mega Man, but I think Castlevania is pretty standout in this regard because it is still much easier than Mega Man. Mega Man is a very hard game. The whip isn't the only thing in Simon's arsenal, though. We can move and jump. Kidding, we can't do those things, but his arsenal also consists of sub-weapons, a category of weapons consisting of a variety of common vampire hunting tools like holy water, crosses, and battle axes. Battle axes might seem like a joke, but I've yet to encounter anyone stronger than a battle axe. The sub-weapon system expands Simon's abilities at the cost of hearts. Hearts kind of work like MP or stamina, but it doesn't regenerate. You have to pick up hearts to restore hearts. As you use sub-weapons by holding up and your attack button, you'll consume hearts. Then you'll break candlesticks and other similar stage objects to get hearts back. You might also find chicken dinners and broken walls. If you've ever heard mention of wall chicken, it comes from this series. All of the sub-weapons are Holy Water, Cross, Axe, Dagger, and Stopwatch, and you can only hold one at a time. The Holy Water is an amazing tool because despite how small of an area it covers in the game, you'll throw a bottle on the ground and it'll bloom into a flame, annihilating most foes who dare step it. It makes for a great zoning ability. If something's fast or something is slightly higher than Simon's whip, it has an arc when you throw it very slightly, making it sometimes more effective than his whip. The cross usually functions like a boomerang, going forward and back, dealing damage to any ghoul or ghosty dumb enough to be hit, let alone twice. But they can't really help it, their brains melted away a long time ago. Just like mine. The dagger is also a deceptively weak tool, dealing little damage but costing the least amount of hearts and having a long range, being able to go off the screen. Axes are very situational and it can be strong in niche cases, as it helps to make up for Simon's lack of verticality with his weapons. It arcs way up and comes back down. And last of all, is the stopwatch. It freezes enemies and, well, everything on screen for a short duration, being able to make enemies vulnerable and easier to hit for longer periods of time. With good timing, this can let you get off a lot of damage on a single enemy. Those might seem a little silly, but like the axe, they all make up for Simon's shortcomings in some key way, and you'll no doubt have a favorite by the end of your playthrough, and that favorite will be the Holy Water. This sub-weapon and heart system is a staple of the pre-RPG era, and is eventually phased out by spells and other abilities while making occasional returns here and there, like in Harmony of Dissonance. Usually if you're playing a Belmont, you're using sub-weapons, but something neat about them is in each game that they're in, most of them function a little bit differently, and may have ultimate attack versions of them, like Richter's Cross Attack and Rondo of Blood in Symphony of the Night. There are some additional pickups along the way that can make the game easier, or just provide more points. Since stages have a time limit and we have limited lives, this game can be played as a high-score game like an arcade game. For additional pickups, we have money bags, crowns, and chests for money, golden jar for temporary invincibility/invisibility, metal chain to upgrade the whip's reach and damage, blue rosary, which works like a screen clear, and numbers. The Roman numerals are upgrades that increase the effectiveness of sub-weapons, allowing for double or triple use. As for the game itself, it's a platformer side-scroller played over the course of 18 stages, and a single run with minimal issues will take you a couple hours. After 3 stages, you get a boss fight at the end of the 3rd stage. Despite not having a save system and having timed stages, this game is pretty lengthy. In future versions of this game, like the one I'm playing on the GBA, we do get saves for Castlevania 1, but exploration in this one is very arcadey and very limited. For the most part, you will be going in one direction, defeating things on your way, then encountering a boss. There's zero chance of you getting lost. The stage ends when you grab the red orb from the dead boss, then you see a cinematic of Simon moving on to the next section where it shows a map of Dracula's castle. This is actually pretty neat as it presents the stages in a way that makes them appear much more grand and large scale, and it's already a decently sized game. Once we get into the RPG era, you'll see a lot more exploration and games that are in the double digits of hours of length. When you start the game, there isn't any cutscenes or lore dumps. Simon walks up to a gated community, breaks in, and then you're in the first stage, or where you last saved. For lore, usually these games reserve all of that for the manual, a paper pamphlet that used to come with games that they expected you to read in full before even picking up a controller. They did this because these old games didn't have much data on them, so it didn't really allow for them to build a full tutorial. So the manual and sometimes player's guides were integral to even just play. If you bought a game used, you were kinda screwed. So, here's your story, straight from the English manual. Good evening. Step into the shadows of the deadliest dwelling on Earth. You've arrived at Castlevania and you're here on business. To destroy forever the curse of the evil Count. Unfortunately, everyone is home this evening. Bats, ghosts, every kind of creature you can imagine. You'll find them all over the place if they don't find you first. Because you got to get through 6 monstrous floors before you even meet up with the master of the house. Your magic whip will help, and you'll probably find a weapon or two along the way, but once you make it to the tower, you can count on a duel to the death. Death is capitalized with a D there. A little foreshadowing, I guess. The Count has waited 100 years for a rematch, and he's ready. Are you? Not much in the way of lore, right? No mention of Simon and his family's quest. Unfortunately, the back of the box isn't any more help. It kind of feels like these were written by a random guy who didn't even really play the game. I don't know if they translated this directly from the Japanese manual because I couldn't find translations of the Japanese manual. But yeah, in terms of story, We kinda got scammed on this one. I would love to know what the Japanese manual says, but I can't read Japanese. Okay, I went back and used Google Translate to translate the images, and yes, it looks like the American team didn't translate the original version of the manual, as the story for Castlevania 1 from the beginning has been about Belmont's generational struggle with Dracula. Here is a Google translation of what the manual says for the intro. They must have thought that the Americans wouldn't have cared about the story, or they were trying to cut back on the page count. Here's what it says. Akumajo Castlevania story. Transylvania is a small peaceful country in medieval Europe, and it is home to the legend of Dracula. Dracula is resurrected once every 100 years when the power of Christ weakens through the prayers of an evil-hearted person. Each time he is resurrected, his magical powers grow stronger. Dracula was resurrected once before, but Dracula's ambition to cover the world with a cloud of darkness and rule over the world of darkness was crushed by the hero Christopher Belmont. Demon King Dracula returns for Easter. Sounds like the plot for like a children's cartoon. 100 years have passed since Dracula was defeated in a deadly battle with Christopher Belmont and went to sleep again in a remote part of Transylvania. On Easter night, a grand carnival was held in the town to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. However, in the ruins of a ruined monastery on the outskirts of town, heretics have placed a human figure on the corpse of Dracula. A black mass ritual was performed in which fresh blood was poured out in an attempt to revive immortal life. And just as thunder clouds covered the town and a streak of lightning pierced the monastery, the demon lord Dracula, with his dark ambitions, returned to the world once more. In an attempt to save the city from crisis, Simon, a young man of Belmont blood, takes his father's whip, which has mysterious powers, and enters Dracula's castle alone. So as you can see, like from the very beginning, the story has been about the Belmont responsibility, the Belmont struggles, generational struggles. It's just for some reason in the American version they decided not to translate it directly and decided to keep it short. I don't know, maybe they didn't think it was going to do well in the US and then it ended up doing very well. That's just how it is. That's happened with a lot of games. They just don't think it'll hit with American audiences as well as it ends up doing. We go up to the gate and make ourselves at home. We walk in the front door and do what God put us on this earth to do. Slay. I won't be going over the game entirely because I want you to experience the game too, and it's just 3 hours, and it's Widow Will We Flee. The first stage is of course a cakewalk, well, zombie walk. There are tons of zombies here, and this is something you'll see in most Castlevanias, the long hallway with infinitely spawning zombies at the beginning of the game. This is a really straightforward stage. Literally. You're just running to the right, smacking dudes and hitting objects. The goal is to get either an axe or a stopwatch, and that's because, despite how good the holy water is, it doesn't really reach the boss on this stage. The boss is like me, except they're ugly. Their attack pattern, also like me, is incredibly simple. They lazily float left and right, and when they feel like it, they sit still to charge at you, and this is your chance to hit them with your whip. You can get some added height from the ledge to the right, but if you got an axe, like I said, you can just toss a couple of them and be done. The stopwatch, you'll need to wait for them to attack, then use it. You can then either use sub-weapons like the dagger or cross to hit them from the right platform, but the axe just trivializes this boss entirely. Castlevania can be challenging for some, but this boss should be no issue for the vast majority of people. The game does get harder, and if you were playing drunk like I was, it can get much more difficult. But this is a trial and error game. I feel like a lot of people aren't willing to die, lose progress, and try again. I think many choose to play on a difficulty where they maybe die once an hour or two, and that's fine. But if you're adverse to dying and learning, then old games aren't really a good fit for you in general. Castlevania for your first playthrough will be experimentation, learning patterns, and dying a bunch. You won't make it through without a game over for your first time. But even with experience and knowing what you're doing, you will still encounter segments where the enemies act different or don't follow your plans and you die. All you can do is dust yourself off and try again. Now, about that difficulty. Castlevania is difficult, but in some ways it's much kinder than its peers at the time because you can take a lot more hits before dying. Castlevania was made in the age that home consoles were becoming popular again after Atari killed them. Everyone had a Nintendo, but a lot of video games from the time were still arcade experiences. Since everything had to move over from the arcade to Nintendo, that meant arcade games needed to be changed. Many arcade games were very difficult in order to eat as many quarters as possible, but Nintendo was a home system where people would be playing to relax. And probably the machine didn't accept quarters, and I don't know how you would get someone to come and take the quarters. That just sounds like a pain. Many arcade games remained unchanged, and many just took out the credits thing and slapped it in there. This meant that some games didn't have a way to continue, but remained difficult. Imagine trying to clear an entire arcade game with a single quarter. It's pretty challenging. So when new games were made for the Nintendo, specifically, that meant some changes had to be made. Some went with extra lives, continues, and a password system so that you could pick up from the last level you played. Nintendo didn't add saves in Nintendo cartridges until about a year into the NES's life cycle when they put a battery in Legend of Zelda. For developers, this meant an extra cost and it cut into their profits, and they were likely already paying licensing fees to Nintendo for using their cartridges. So most third-party games didn't save, because they didn't want to pay the extra cheddar for that fancy battery, I mean, it's really the battery they want. And most of these games, you didn't have a lot of things that you were trying to get the game to memorize anyway. It wasn't like Pokemon, where each Pokemon was custom. So password systems usually worked perfectly fine most of the time and just remembered the last stage that you finished. In Castlevania's case, it differs from arcade games in a lot of ways. At its absolute base, it is a challenging game, and it can be difficult. There are instant deaths from falling off stages, enemies that seemingly appear out of nowhere, cheap shots, enemies knocking you off of stages, and collision damage. Oh, I absolutely hate the stairs in this game. That you can't just land on them. It's so stupid. Any other game would just let you land directly on the stairs. I hate the stairs in this game. Bosses also had a health bar and could take a lot of hits. Just as many as you. You know, just take me to Dracula immediately. I'm ready. That old it doesn't know what he's got coming. Oh, we got a boss fight already. Wow, okay, this first stage is done so quick. This is definitely a boss fight. Oh, hell yeah, this is a bot! We need 5 hearts to activate time stop. God damn. And it puts me all the way back before the spike room? That meant that even with a health bar, you could still die a lot from cheap or things seemingly beyond your control. If we treat this game as just Simon, his whip, and his health bar, it's a hard game. Thankfully, Simon, as previously mentioned, has a myriad of tools at his disposal. Compared to the arcades of the time, you usually had a couple power-ups, your base kit, lives, continues, and an army of quarters. Simon has a health bar, 5 sub-weapons, multiple power-ups, continues, lives, and a very generous checkpoint system, often reviving you just 1 room back. I think Castlevania is hard in the way that Dark Souls is. It's a memorization game. You learn the spawns, you learn the attack patterns, then you make it through the stage. It might not have things like farming and level ups like Dark Souls does to make it easier, but it plays similarly. Slow dude with sluggish attacks memorizes enemy patterns, so after enough tries, he makes it through. In a sense, Dark Souls can be easier because of your ability to farm XP, and you have saves. In Castlevania, you die, you expend a life, and spawn back 1 room. When you run out of lives entirely, you can repeat the stage from the beginning, or you can shut off the console and have it start from the very beginning. Is it hard? Yeah, I guess. But a lot of people have it in their head that just because they can beat it means that it isn't hard. We each have different abilities, and not everyone is going to be able to beat it. Some of us are better at other games than others, you know? That too. Just because you can juggle doesn't mean that everybody else can. I think with enough practice and patience, most could beat Castlevania, but I think that if you want to use save states to do so, just go ahead and do it. Just do me a favor and don't use the save states in the boss fight. Just use it outside of the boss room. I really do think save state abuse will cheapen the experience for you, and I want you to like this series. But also, I'm not your boss. Do what you want. I don't personally use save states anymore because Retro Achievements has hardcore mode which disables them, but when I did, I always went by the rule. If it's something that I would have done eventually and given enough time, then it's okay for me to do it. Because then I'm just respecting my time. I don't think you need to play through the same stage 20 times just to beat a single boss. Use a save state before the fight and reload when you die. The first stage was just a tutorial. It was there to teach us how our whip works, get us used to the time. The boss taught us that we can jump and attack. It taught us to use the environment to our advantage, and it taught us to use sub-weapons that can make things much easier. It also taught us about the stairs, and I absolutely hate the stairs in this game. To use stairs, you need to stand at the base, then hold up and move left or right, and you're sort of just locked into that stairwell until you jump off or finish the climb. It's really annoying because you can't just jump onto the stairs. If you do, you will fall through, which later on leads to lots of platforming-related deaths. And if you need to climb the stairs to get somewhere, you need to dedicate to it and make sure there aren't any enemies nearby. If you do get hit by an enemy while you're on the stairwell, you don't get knocked off the stairwell though, you just take the hit. The next stage sort of teaches us how to deal with enemies in a non-lethal manner. It teaches you to pick your fights. It also introduces us to Medusa heads. These enemies will fly at you like bats, but rather than going directly for you, they float up and down in a wave-like pattern. These enemies can be really annoying in later games when they can spawn in any location in their chosen area, but in the first one they have a set pattern and will always spawn from the same place, usually whichever direction you're facing. So you can whip them or take your time and slowly move through by walking between them or jumping and crouching. Then we're introduced to insta-kills. If you fall off the screen, you die and respawn at the beginning of the prior screen. So if you aren't careful, you'll be repeatedly doing the first Medusa section. This one-shot death lesson continues with crusher traps. They will move up and down and slam on you, and if you touch them even from the side, you will still die. It doesn't help that the middle one is busted, it only goes halfway down, so you have to move, crouch, then move again. After another straightforward walk, it's a boss fight with Medusa's head. She's really easy to deal with and you can easily brute force her. You're going to be able to get more hits in on her than she will on you. But the easier way is to just use holy water or the stopwatch. Just freeze her or plop the holy water on her. I think she's much easier than the bat, honestly. Level 3 is where it actually got really hard for me. This one teaches you about patience and timing. Both are things that I am terrible at. You're introduced to the most annoying enemy in the whole series, Fleamen. They're called this because they're little men who run and jump on you like little fleas. They're small, fast, and hard to hit. You can crouch and hit them as they run at you, and there is a trick to despawn them, and you can also use holy water if they run at you to hit them. They die quick, but you need to be patient or you're going to take a bunch of hits. If you can't handle them on this first stage with them, there is a hidden dinner under the second flea. The next section is mostly just jump platforming and the crows, which suck. They stay just slightly above your whip's max height, then pause for a second before swooping at you. If they do this from above, you can crouch to avoid them and they'll eventually get bored from trying to hit you and then missing. You have some Medusa heads as well and a stairwell, then you have bone pillars that you can't really ignore. If you get hit, you'll fall off the map. So you can use the stopwatch that you get just before the bone pillars, or you can use the water that you got from before the fleas. I recommend the stopwatch, it makes things a lot easier. There are a ton of crows here too, if you weren't tired of them already. Then you have the mummies, and they're slow and pretty easy to beat, but you're probably already really beat up from the birds and pillars. The main thing that this stage teaches you is that with the bone pillars, you can whip the shots that they fire at you, and it'll delete the shot. That translates over to the mummy. So the game educates you through bone pillars how to deal with the mummies. You use the whip to hit their bandages. If you die in general in this game though, you will lose your sub-weapon, and the only one here is a dagger and a hidden dinner. So make sure you beat him the first try while you have the stopwatch. You're probably noticing a pattern here. There isn't any branching paths like you might be used to in future Castlevanias. The design we call Metroidvania really doesn't show itself until later. The majority of the game is going to play very similarly to the previous level, level 3. You'll be running to the right, avoiding enemies while platforming. As I said though, I'm not going to explain every stage because I do actually want you to try it. Overall, I think Castlevania can be fun, but I often found myself quitting after a game over and coming back later. Had I been playing this on an NES, I would have never beaten it since it doesn't save the progress. But playing on GBA is definitely the way to go. You can save wherever you want, and it'll save from the start of the most recent stage. It also has a sleep mode, so you can pick up where you left off, even if you don't have a GBA SP where you can shut the clamshell. I think you should definitely try it out a few times because Castlevania is the peak example of the NES era. It's challenging, but fair. It teaches you to play with the environmental design, and it's fun, especially if you do a drinking stream and find out that you're better at the game drunk. Which is how the second boss of the game, alcoholism, starts. Anyway, speaking of variants, like GBA versus NES, you can play Castlevania on the Famicom Disk System, NES, Nintendo Arcade, Commodore 64, Amiga, MS-DOS, mobile, GBA, and Windows. I'm not going to try all those old PCs, so I'll just tell you to play the GBA version. Play the GBA version. The next game in the series is sort of a variant too. It's called Vampire Killer, and it was released on the MSX2, an old-ass computer made by Microsoft with the intent to make a more appealing computer for Eastern audiences. It was also made in an attempt to standardize the home PC market in the way that the VHS player became standardized. Yes, I read that from the Wikipedia page. This thing is a decade older than me. I am not going to know a damn thing about it. Anyway, Vampire Killer is not to be confused with the Vampire Killer Genesis game, which is actually Castlevania Bloodlines. Vampire MSX2 technically came out a month before Castlevania. It's pretty similar to Castlevania. It still features Simon, the same story, music with some changes, and just about everything else, except that the gameplay and stage design differs quite a bit. The stage design is much more like you'd expect from a more recent Castlevania, featuring circuitous passages and labyrinthian design. Each stage is a single screen, no scrolling or anything like that. You step into a room and it's all there. Then as you continue, you'll notice that the stages may loop themselves or even lead to dead ends. It's much more exploration based. It also features chests and keys that you've got to find. The game is a little faster until the enemies are on screen, and then it chugs. Enemies spawn faster and more frequently, sub-weapons are much more rare, and I'm glad they redid all of this for Castlevania 1. It was a little early to do something like this. I don't know how to explain it, but it did not feel as good to play. If you played Castlevania 1 and you want to try something different, I'd recommend just trying out Vampire Killer on MSX2, but I definitely only played this for 10 minutes before putting it down and audibly saying, ew. In terms of story and character, these two are the same, but that stage design and gameplay is so different that it might put you off. So I'd suggest pretending that VK MSX2 just doesn't exist and play Castlevania 1 on GBA. There are some things that Vampire Killer does better though, like Simon and the stage design. They don't blend into the background as bad as some of the stages on Castlevania 1 does. That's the only nice thing I have to say about it. But thanks for watching. Next time I'll show you Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. You might remember this one because everyone hates it and makes fun of it. It's mostly because of the day-night switching mechanic being poorly executed and interrupting gameplay. They had a good idea, clearly, since every game does day-night cycles nowadays, but it might have been a bit premature. So, I'll see you next time with Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. Leave a bad emoji so I know who my most loyal worshippers are. For now though, let's thank the patrons who make cool videos like this possible. I'd clap my wings for you, but if I did, I might fall if I do that. If you want to help the channel grow, you can do it for free with likes, subs, and sharing the video. If you want to help monetarily, you can become a patron and get access to the secret Discord chat, or become a member and get emotes that you can use in live streams or video comments. Both start at just $1, and both get your name said at the end. So thanks again to the patrons and YouTube members like Momentary Unicorn, Aurora the Puppy Moth, Sly, Nat, Marius, Yeenie, Worm Syrup, Rask, Ver, Beef, Bait, Sly Again, Colorado Blue, Vaderson, Linky, Malding Brick, Splackjack, and Sushion. I'll see you all later. I have to mentally prepare myself for Simon's Quest. I've never played it, but I know things, and I am not looking forward to it.